It all happened because I turned into a damn pervert. So this will be a story with a moral. Something like, don't stir up trouble until it touches you, or don't meddle in the private life of God knows what. And of course, because of a woman. I'm sure half of the crap in this world happens thanks to them. In my case, there was one girl. Her name was Vita, and everything was fine between us. So fine that on Valentine's Day she brought me a telescope. Supposedly we would watch the stars together, but the stars didn't align. Because exactly 2 weeks later she left me for some jerk, son of a family friend. And I was left in the company of a broken heart and a damn telescope. Honestly, my first impulse was to smash it against the wall and throw it away with my miserable memories. But I held onto the hope that Vita would come to her senses and return to me. I would graciously forgive her, subtly hinting that I preserved our dream of stars and all that sappy romance. Yeah, right. No one came back to me, naturally. And somehow on one of those dreary, self-pitying evenings, I decided to dedicate my time to mastering the telescope. Normal people in such cases read the instructions, but I wasn't one of them, so I didn't see any stars. But I did see a couple rolling around in bed, in the apartment building across the street, and a few floors below, a pretty girl who roamed around her apartment in just her underwear. In short, the telescope turned out to be a treasure trove of entertainment, and I quickly became addicted. Soon, like a perverted stalker, I knew everything about my neighbors. Knew that the lady in the Audi brought her lover to her place while the kids were at school. The friendly janitor knocked boots with his significant other, and the cute student spent her evenings watching hardcore hentai. It's a good thing I had rejected the idea of hitting on her once. Who knows what health and potency issues that could have led to. Feeling like an invisible observer was, of course, flattering. But firstly, my consciousness gnawed at me the whole time, almost eroding my last shreds of self-respect. And secondly, and most importantly, the lives of those around me turned out to be remarkably monotonous, and my enthusiasm waned. But, to my delight, within my field of view, apart from respectable new buildings, there were slums. A sadly famous place. A shabby 5-story panel building inhabited mostly by drunks. In short, the Bohemian of our district. Of course, normal people tried to avoid that building around the clock. Juicy curses resounded. Bottles and cigarettes butts flew straight out of the windows, and every week someone was taken away from the slums in the ambulance, usually with a couple of stab wounds. There were also suicide attempts. It's not surprising that the slums provided me with many vivid emotions at any convenient time. My favorite character were a crazy grandmother who dragged all the rubbish from surrounding dumps into her den, a gloomy man who got drunk every evening to the point of insensibility in the company of himself, and a cheerful family in whose apartment the smoke stood like a rocker all the time. It was especially fun to watch how the wife took another random guest into the bedroom, while her hubby examined the contents of his wallet. Not only the TV and computer were forgotten, but also Vita and her new boyfriend. In the end, everything was in full swing for me too, and there was nothing for it. Even my consciousness has finally shut up, because it's one thing to spy on a decent, ordinary people, and quite another thing to spy on all sorts of rabble. After some time I noticed a very strange feature of the slums. After 2 in the morning, all its inhabitants, even the most inveterate ones, literally passed out, as if someone had turned them off. At first, this coincidence seemed very funny to me. Well, of course, the hour of the bull and the whole rabble goes to confrontation with their personal demons. But the more I watched it, the more unnatural everything that was happening seemed to me, especially after I began to notice shadows scurrying around the slums after lights out. But this, in a strange way, only increased my curiosity, and it was eventually rewarded. I was able to examine the owners of these shadows. They walked on all fours and looked most like skeletons, covered with thick black skin. At first, I didn't understand what the hell they were doing. It seemed like they were just crawling up to the sleeping inhabitants of the slums and freezing next to them for several hours, as if they were falling into some kind of a stupor. But then, having finally figured out the damn telescope settings, I was able to zoom in on the picture, and I saw that the air around the sleeping people seemed to be swaying sort of like a haze over heated asphalt. Only this haze, despite all the laws of physics, flowed to where, according to my estimates, the black freak's mouth was. I had no idea what to do with this amazing information, but just in case I decided to continue observing. I was very interested in where the black crab comes from and where it then disappears. And curiosity, as you know, is punishable. But I was far away and no one could reach me. I'm in a cozy apartment after all. In the end, I found out that they weren't that many creatures. About 5. They visited apartment in a complete random order. Nothing special happened to the local bastards after their visits. They woke up in the morning as usual and went to drink and waste their lives down the drain. I really regretted that I couldn't look at the creatures in all the details. But then, I was lucky again. One night, one of them decided to pay a visit to my favorite character, a lonely drunk who passed out right at the kitchen table, not having time to bring to his mouth another glass. At first, the black freak just stood there in his usual stupor, but then he moved his head as if he had heard something and stared straight at me. Fuck. He had no eyes, no mouth, no ears, nothing at all. Just a black ball on a thin neck. But at the same time, I felt with all my gut that he saw me. That this crab is looking right at me and knows perfectly well that I see it too. There was a buzzing in my ears. I could have sworn that, despite the considerable distance, I heard some kind of disgusting squealing and screeching, but it was as if something was holding me back from tearing my gaze away, closing the curtains as quickly as possible and pretending that I was never here. The freak kept looking and looking at me with his eyeless muzzle, and I stood like a pillar and was afraid that my skull would explode like a rotten pumpkin. And then the telescope lens burst with a crash. I jumped back, tripped over something and fell on the floor, finally hitting my head on the armrest of the chair. When I came to my senses, it was still dark outside the window. I decided that only a few seconds have passed, but then computer helpfully suggested that I had been in a blackout for exactly 24 hours. And during this time, not a single bastard bothered to call and find out what happened to me. I felt so lousy and lonely that I hardly kicked the useless telescope and then took out the vodka left over after the New Year. I drank it all. In the morning, having somehow slept and sobered up, I went to work, but suddenly I found myself at the kiosk, buying booze. It felt like I did it under hypnosis. But I wanted to drink wildly, And even the drunkard inhabitant of the slums standing next to me smiled so knowingly, revealing the rotting stumps of his teeth, which made me really sick. In general, I only felt normal at home after the third glass. It seems that I drank for 10 days. Apparently, suffering for vita, find out a way of self-expression. I woke up in the morning completely exhausted, pulled on my jacket and went for vodka. Sometimes in the company of neighbor, but more often alone. The neighbor, by the way, turned out to be a cool dude. I thought he was sad computer nerd, but after we smoked a couple of joints together and got drunk a couple of times, in short, we are now inseparable. Damn, what am I talking about? Something strange has been going on with my memory lately. Oh, yes. As for the black freaks, I sometimes think about them, especially when in more or less sane state. I trudge up the stairs to the door to the entrance. The sounds of swearing and thieves chasing, as well as the garbage and puddles of urine that appeared out of nowhere on once clean steps, are very conducive to the memories of slums. I even decided to buy a new telescope. We have to find out what it all was after all. Yep, I'll buy it tomorrow. I'm not just some drunk, you know. I can quit anytime.